Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Digital Leaders Show, where each week we discuss key issues at the intersection of business, technology, and the humanities in hopes of making you a better digital leader. This week, we're discussing data privacy, waning employee loyalty, a possible tipping point for AI, and other headlines from the world of enterprise transformation. We're live each Wednesday at noon Eastern, 9 Pacific, 6 Central European Time. We're on YouTube, LinkedIn, and Twitter. And the audio recording is made available on podcast platforms the following week. Don't forget to check out DEInetwork.com for executive coaching and industry briefings, peer-to-peer executive client groups, and custom research projects. I'm Dan Goodstein. I head up Digital Enterprise Institute and the Institute for Robotic Process Automation and Artificial Intelligence. We're a professional association and peer-to-peer research network providing education, networking, and advice to over 130,000 members globally, all around automation, AI, and digital transformation. My co-host is Carlos Alvarenga. He's a researcher and author, an educator at the University of Maryland and Georgetown, and formerly advisor with EY and Accenture. Carlos, good afternoon, my friend.
Good afternoon, Dan.
What's happening in the world today? You're a big stock market guy. I know you wake up and check the markets out. What's going on?
It's not pretty today. The market is not enjoying the news from Microsoft. Looks like 10,000 employees are going to be laid off by the firm. So I think that we continue this sort of tech retrenchment today, right? It sort of opened with some positive news about inflation, again continuing to kind of abate a bit. But the Microsoft news seems to really have changed the perspective on the market today so far, and I think it continues this theme of right Google and others sort of rethinking the business model and reacting to what they see is a slightly different outlook for the next couple of years for the tech industry.
Yeah, it's we talked a few weeks ago about is this even back to the Great Resignation, is it more of a reshuffling? And I think to myself, these companies hired so quickly. Is this just kind of a level set or a reset, or are they really changing the the business? It was the business model. It wasn't lost on me that last week Microsoft announces that they want to invest heavily in Chat GPT, and then the following week they announced these layoffs. You think it's a coincidence?
Well, I think that's the question. There's another article today about how Microsoft, right, Nadella is at Davos, and he said that they're going to begin to put OpenAI technologies into many of their flagship products. So if you connect the two of them together and say, okay, what we're seeing here is this almost like the Zuckerberg "let's go mobile" moment, right? From now on, don't bring me anything that's not mobile. It's almost like Nadella saying, from now on, don't bring me anything that doesn't have AI in it, right? If that's the case, and we were talking about this before we went on the air, that perhaps we're at this crossroads, right? We're at this point where the age of the internet has started to end, and we're now at the beginning of the age of AI. And as I was saying a minute ago, right, that if maybe OpenAI is the Netscape of AI, right? The first time that the average person kind of got it and saw the possibilities of what all this new technology that had been sitting there for decades in the kids' internet, right? Because that's the 70s. Suddenly, there was literally a portal to that created, and ChatGPT, DALI, that's what they are, right? And they're portals, interfaces into AI. And we may look back and see that little chat screen with ChatGPT equivalent to the Google search screen, right? The first time people saw that 30 years ago. It transformed everything.
But you know what? Netscape is gone.
Yeah, right. And that's the thing. But it's what it did lives on, right? What it created isn't gone. The company but what it created isn't. And it's interesting if we say, okay, between Netscape and today, in that age of the internet, if that is the case, come back 30 years from now, what will we think about? What will we have then, right? That's AI driven. Is it that level of change? What new hardware, what new products have before, what new things are going to be created because of this? So I tend to lean towards that viewpoint. I think we are at a tipping point. I think we are beginning to see the first iteration of a whole new age, and maybe that's kind of what's happening behind the scenes when people saw it and they go, okay. Nadella said in his comments that they were just, I think, kind of surprised by the consumer right, kind of reaction to ChatGPT. I think it's gone from like 20 million a day to like 200 million visits a day, right? So that's, I think it's just taken people by surprise that the average person wants to interact with this, and that's a very different version of AI than we've seen when we talk about facial recognition, right? Process automation. That's enterprise behind the scenes kind of stuff. This is something that anybody can see and react to.
Yeah, we've talked about, right, how much of this has been kind of back office and really kind of under the hood, and the whether it's Chat GPT or any of the open AI stuff, and whether it becomes Netscape or AOL, in the sense that it created a movement and then didn't stick around, but the, like you say, the effects that it kind of helped create continue on or really transform on. I think the accessibility factor here is really what's making the difference. So many of people on our network, have been trying to explain AI, intelligent automation, to customers and even the people at their family barbecues, right, for a
Right.
number of years, and now they can see it, and it's bleeding into areas that even I, as a practitioner, as kind of a digital transformation evangelist, I didn't see, right. I mean, there's an article in Bloomberg this week about how there's some facial recognition technology that they're saying may be able to predict the market. So that you maybe you come closer to, I forget the term. You're a stock guy, maybe this idea of like the perfect market where it's all automated, it's all kind of predictable, and it's the gut feeling of in-person human traders kind of goes away.
Well, that's again, right. There's always been this stream of research into how to trader psychology. There was a great book that came out a few years ago called "The Hour Between Dog and Wolf," which is written by an ex-trader who's now, I think, he's a neuro researcher in the UK, and he looked at the personalities, the kind of people who get hired to be traders, right, and how they are in some ways sort of physically different from a lot of people. So I think this is one of, in that stream of, can I figure out kind of the magic box that tells me what the market's going to do a few minutes before the market actually does it. I think the bigger uh, article that I noticed was the one about higher ed and the impact that ChatGPT is already having on universities. They're having to go back and rethink exams, essays, papers, right? In fact, the funny part was, I think the article opens the story of a professor who got a paper and got suspicious because it was so good.
Right.
Right. Yeah. It was perfectly cited, cogently argued, like well referenced. It's like, this can't be the work of my students.
He said he never saw paper that perfect in all his years of teaching.
Right. Exactly. That's what kind of tips you off that this thing was made by a robot, and you have to go back and say, okay, from now on, you have to write all your papers in class. I can't let you create anything outside the room. Go back to the days of those little notebooks, right? No computers during exams, because the aid that these machines bring completely changes what it's about. So I think this continues that idea of we're entering a different kind of phase, right? And just the way in COVID, higher ed was kind of like the canary in the coal mine. So much of what the impact that phenomenon had was visible in education. We may be seeing the same kind of phenomenon, with stories like this, which is one of many to come. Right.
He should have made it less perfect. When I was in school, when somebody cheated, not that I did, but people I knew, if they had like the test, the answer key, you're supposed to purposely get a couple wrong, so you didn't get anybody too suspicious. But we talked last week about the difference between this kind of technology just taking over the world and people's jobs, and people applying it differently, and getting kind of better results or higher levels of work as a result of using these things as a tool. That's what I thought of when I read this article about how even the professors are saying basically you could either try to fight it, or one of the ideas that came out of, I don't know if it was in the Times article or another one, where they basically said, we're going to teach differently now, right? We're going to teach people how to use this tool instead of banning this tool. One of them was going to ban it, in the school, but you're not going to stop people from so actually using it and allowing them to use it, and then changing the test criteria to a more critical thinking, higher thinking kind of assignment, and opposed to just writing an essay.
Right. It becomes this question of interpretation, right? We were talking about this last week with our guests, this, what I always call the CIA model of analytics, right? Which is there's calculation, interpretation, then action. And you might say that this once again puts the emphasis on that I, right? What are you seeing? What are you reading, right? What does the information sort of mean? The ability to interpret what the machine gives you becomes a higher order skill. That's not really that big of a deal on Google, right? There's no interpretation of search listings. Maybe there's some minimal, but because it's just a listing, it's just a catalog, right? It doesn't require a lot of mental effort to sort through Google results. It does when you play around with ChatGPT, right? Because a lot of it can be wrong, but also what does it mean? Because now it's a machine giving you a story, and interpreting a story is completely different from interpreting a catalog, right? Or an inventory list. It's a different skill set. So that's the interesting question. I think that the point of the professional article was that now it's not about finding the information, because it's going to become so easy. It's like the calculator, right? It's like the liberal arts version of the calculator. So, okay, figuring out who wrote what and what this means. Where does this text come from? What is its context? That's a very different thing. It's the difference between sort of undergraduate and graduate education, I would say. An undergraduate, for the most part, it's knowledge transfer. Professor has body of knowledge X, and it's being transferred to undergraduates, and then you sort of test to see whether the acquisition is complete, right? For the most part, in graduate school, PhD programs, they're very different. You kind of teach yourself. You read everything, you ingest yourself, and then you go into a lecture or a seminar and you discuss it, put it into context. What does it mean? So what we may be seeing is that what used to be kind of exclusively the graduate model will migrate more and more to undergraduate curricula, possibly.
The other thing that popped into my mind looking at this was and another topic, segue to another topic that we've talked a bunch about on this show, which is data privacy, right? I had to explain this to a family member, a non-techie family member over the weekend. And sometimes we actually learn better by having to explain or teach things, right? As as a professor, right? And so I'm trying to figure out how to explain this in more basic and simple terms, and so much of the power of the AI, and as that accelerates the need for data to be input into those AI, those algorithms. It just brings up this privacy issue. And, I'm as I explained it to this person, and, as I was doing research, for today's show, my theory, Carlos, is that privacy is dead. I mean, I think it's a misconception that we even have it today. I mean, almost every major tech company, its bread and butter is fed, by this data. You see some of the news this week. Norton LifeLock had a data breach, right? I mean, the company that's supposed to protect you in case of a data breach just got hacked, right? So all that data is out on the internet. There was a Russian ransomware attack on the UK Royal Mail this week, so who knows what data they have or may get. And then there's this piece about Apple in Wired magazine, which said, hey, remember Apple, that security conscious company that everybody liked? I think, Carlos, you even referred to them as security centric. Now there's this piece that their business model is changing. It's becoming more subscription based, less hardware, more advertising driven, and so all of a sudden, they're collecting a lot more information about you than at least we thought they were.
Well, I think there's an interesting paradox there, which is that because it's built a brand as privacy centric, people give it more information. At least I know I do. I worry less about browsing on Safari, because I think, well, sure, they can see whatever it is that I'm doing, but it's Apple. So they're reaping the benefits, right, of a decade of talking about privacy because people become less stressed about protecting everything on something like Safari than perhaps on Chrome and other sort of devices. And okay, they when it comes to behavior analysis, right, certainly the maker of the iPhone is going to collect more information than anybody on earth. It's become it's such a it's an ubiquitous device, right? For a lot of people, it is with them from sunup, from the moment they wake up to the moment they go to bed. It tracks everything in their life, where, what they do, where they are. So yeah, it doesn't surprise me that Apple has that information. The question is, what do they do with it? And we've said it before, right? We consumers has just made the choice early on that they just didn't care. They care more about, at least U.S. consumers did, right? They cared more about convenience, right, and access than they did about privacy. As we said before, it's been shifting in Europe somewhat over the last 5 years, but I still don't see that as a big debate here in the U.S.
Yeah, I don't know if it's that people, they did sign up for it, right? But I don't know if they knowingly signed up for it, and then we discussed this a little bit, I think last week. Maybe people should be smart enough to know that that adage, if you're not paying for it, you're the product, right?
Right.
But as we've talked about, these end user license agreements are very, very obscenely long. Nobody reads them. People, maybe didn't realize the extent to which they opted into it. But there's also scenarios where they didn't opt into it, right? If your information is exposed by by the Royal Mail, you didn't opt into that, right? The cameras that are taking your pictures in New York City in 4K high definition now, or the cameras that are taking pictures of you because you may not have a Ring camera, but your neighbors all do, or even traffic cameras where they're taking pictures, people going through traffic lights. We didn't opt into that, right?
No, we're slowly moving into a surveillance state, right? Again, to various degrees. In China, you have probably the most extreme manifestation of that today, but even in the U.S., where we claim to not like these things, like you said, cameras, facial recognition, uh, whatever the NSA and all those people are doing, looking at the internet, right? We are all under surveillance to one degree or another. We're all being captured as we move kind of through the world. Again, I don't at this time hear. I don't want to hear politicians talking about it, right? We haven't heard one major presidential candidate make privacy an issue, right? Or to say that this is, I'm going to run on the fact that I want to stop this and pull this back. You hear it because I'm a libertarian, right? By leaning, you hear kind of in those circles, but in the mainstream political dialogue, this is just a non-issue so far.
So what's the answer? The advice that I gave this family member is, and by the way, the conversation started because my daughter wanted to play a song and couldn't figure out why the Alexa wasn't responding to her, and it was because it was unplugged. It was what prompted this conversation. And what I kind of said is, give up, it's over, right? You can unplug the Alexa all you want, but the GPS in your phone, in your car, the phone that you're using right now, all these kind of cameras everywhere. Just assume that your information is already out there and switch to how you can start using the information for your own good, in opposed to just giving it to all these companies or entities that are they're getting their benefit out of it. I just think the idea of data privacy is becoming a misnomer. I don't think you can realistically, in the world we live in, completely protect your privacy. I just don't think you can.
I'm more optimistic. I think this is a great open area for innovation. I read I think it was a year or two ago, about a company that had developed clothing that would trick cameras. For whatever reason, there was this pattern that if you used the pattern on a shirt, for example, or a jacket, it made facial recognition cameras kind of go haywire, and they couldn't read who you were, right? And so I think that maybe if you're an optimist and you look at AI and you say that one of these days there'll be a digital camouflage that somebody will come along and invent and say, listen, add this to your phone, add this to your computer, and it's going to scramble your digital signature wherever it goes. I'm more in the camp of there have to be people looking at this and saying this is $1 trillion market waiting to be created. That sooner that at some point, right, people are willing to pay. How much would you pay? Like back to LifeLock, right? How much would you pay a startup and say, listen, for a subscription basis, I will scramble every digital trace that comes out of your phone or computer.
I think the problem is that whenever I think this is one of the problems with cybersecurity. You know, whenever you become the person doing that, you become the target, right? You're not, you know, you're not going to stop banking. You're not going to stop. You know, I mean, what was that? The one years ago of Ashley Madison, the cheating affair website got hacked. Unless you're going to completely wipe your data, like you can do maybe in Europe, completely wipe your data and then never come back on the grid. You know, you're going to have to bank. You're going to have to live. You're going to have to file your. I mean, I just figured out that my taxes are on a website that you could look up in 10 seconds now, which is kind of good because I was looking for some information from my government. And I was shocked at how easy it was to get, but then I was shocked at how easy it was to get. So, you know, and then I think that, you know, you bring on another point, which is, you know, politics. Not that I want to turn this into a political conversation, but, you know, until our politicians aren't beholden to big corporates, you'll never see that, because the big corporates want the data because they're monetizing the data. So you're never going to have a scenario where they get up and say, "Oh, let's stop this." I'll tell you what they do. It's illegal in some states to mess with your license plate so that the cameras on the traffic lights can't read your plate.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's what they've done.
I think it comes back to the all of us at some point, if it ever comes the day that we say that's enough, right? Either somebody creates a technological solution and it's solved kind of by the market, right? Or there's a social change that says we've had it and it's time to kind of pull all this back. You know, the right to be forgotten dialogue that's been happening in Europe for a decade. So, but at least in the US, we're sort of not there yet, right? We're still in this, go ahead, I don't care. You know, I click through the EULA 2 screens, never read it. And, you know, okay, hope for the best, right? It's whistling through the data graveyard
Yeah.
when it comes to the US.
I think what's more likely to happen is, and you know, I think we talked about this also a few weeks ago. You know, a little bit more clarity over what data and how it's used and how it's anonymized. And I think where you will see politicians get involved is, you know, in situations like bias, right? So there's this other piece in Wired about, you know, algorithms that were, you know, penalizing minorities in renting and real estate. There's been a big push in New York against real estate agents for, you know, biased practices related to real estate as one example. Department of Justice is looking into this now at a federal level. So I think there'll be scenarios like that for sure.
The solution I read about again a couple of years ago, and which I really like, was the idea of a data bank. And so what happened was that anything collected about me would go into a neutral bank, right? And so the Apple, Microsoft, whoever, right, Bank of America, would have to go to the bank to pull that information, and I give it permission, right? But it couldn't keep it, right? It had to use it, destroy it, or sort of deposit it. They could borrow information about me for whatever purpose it was, like a credit bureau in a way, right? Which is kind of a data bank. And then, but they had to be sort of put back. They couldn't hold on to it. Just the way companies will tell you, hey, we don't hold your credit card, is an example of that, right? You have to give it to us every time. Okay, then why are you holding other stuff? Why can't it sit in a neutral place, right? That I know what's there, and anytime I want, I can go in and I can delete whatever I want. I mean, in the right model, that's what we would have, right, Dan? I would have the data bank that I own the account, and I give permission. And by the way, the author of the book made the case that every time they access, they should pay you. The more your information is accessed for something that makes them money, you should get a royalty from that, right? That there's value in that. So, and there have been various attempts to try to put a value on, if companies had to pay us for what they, from the value they get from what they know about us, how much is that actually worth, right?
Yeah, yeah.
What is our information worth? So I still think that those kinds of ideas where all these companies have to give up this information, put it in a neutral place that I own, and I decide who gets it and who doesn't. That's the way it should be.
There's something there, Carlos. I really like that. You made me think of a talk that I was a part of a number of years ago, where a futurist was talking about the idea of digital twins, and how your digital twin would basically handle some of these things for you. They were even talking about in death, executing your wishes and your will, related to social media accounts and banking accounts, and making it easier to pass on financial assets. But if you could create that for data
Yeah,
today, right, and have that live on, it kind of even exists. I mean, you have things like single sign on, and where you
yeah,
can share your data and access and then revoke it. The problem is it's run by Google, so they're obviously monetizing that information somehow. But if we could create that in a neutral way, you have your password managers, you have your permission managers, and maybe you have a data manager too.
there was a story of years ago about this Scandinavian company that had built this digital suicide button. Remember, if you remember that story, where you would go in and people would have these kind of ceremonies where they would commit digital suicide, because the thought, at least the story was that you press this button and this thing went to work and it would wipe you from everything, right? And by the time, and then once you hit the go button, it wasn't going to stop. And so when it was done, you had been erased from everything. You had no credit report, you had no history. It would took you out of Google, whatever. But it was this like kill button that erased you completely. And I think that, again, let's see a company come in and say, "Hey, we're open for business, and you've got this account, and whenever you want, right, you can press the kill button, and it will go through and erase you completely if that's what you really need." Right. So again, I'd like to see a market solution to this. Instead of another app for making videos or whatever, let's get to work. Sharing people doing stupid dances. Let's solve a real problem, and a real problem is something like this, right? Give us a solution to this issue of this information belongs to me and I can't get it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. You could just wipe it out. I know a few people that would have probably wiped themselves out a couple times by now.
Yeah, well, look, I have a couple of friends who tried really hard to live, quote unquote, off the grid, right? They pay cash, everything. They don't have credit cards. They really make an effort to be unseen. What kills them is the cell phone, right? And even though they're using old school like Nokia phones, so there's nothing except text and phone. It's still a signature there. The tower is still picking you up, right? But that's about as far as you can take it. It's sort of my impression. But the minute you get anything, any kind of transaction record, then you're sort of there. So look,
Yeah.
a lot. I do think it's a social issue, and I don't know what it would take for us to en masse revolt and say we've had it. I want all this information back.
So, just to switch gears with you a little bit, just back to the top of the conversation, we were talking about, Microsoft stock getting killed, the layoffs, and all that. What stock didn't get killed this morning was, and this kind of shocked me, the airlines, right? So apparently, people are still traveling despite the fact that supply and demand, the airlines are packed. There's been all kinds of issues lately. People don't seem to care. They're still traveling. They're still spending money. And I think it really relates to this new world mentality that people have of, hey, life's short. I'm not going to the office. I'm going to do the things that I want to do. And that may include travel and other related entertainment and other related activities, which, by the way, I actually have more time for now because I'm not spending a good chunk of that time in the office or commuting to that office.
I still think there's a bit of. I mean, I know that there is. Because I know people who are like this. Who there's still some pent up COVID demand. Right? Who people who I know who are just now are willing to go ahead and get on planes and travel or do a cruise or whatever. I think there was still this sense of people sort of thought it's still not safe. But once the switch kind of got flipped in the middle of last year, you're right. It's nonstop. The planes are packed, and maybe there is a connect to this sense of the COVID realization of life isn't, work isn't life. And I'm going to continue to try to, as much as I can, shape my own professional existence. There was an article we talked about this week where companies are having a hard time, in some cases, sort of defining the new hybrid work models, right? They're trying to get them brands and working through what it is. And there's still this attempt 2 years after COVID of trying to figure out what should hybrid work sort of be. And I think it's because a lot of employees themselves don't know. Right? They're still sort of working through, do I really want to go back? When do I have to go back? And there is definitely this large segment that likes the autonomy and likes to be left alone, and that's not going to change. That group
Yeah,
is
yeah.
back. Yeah. Uh-huh.
Yeah, and I think yeah, I think that's here to stay. I think that, employees are going to drive this, and as a result of all of this, and it's a little bit of chicken and egg, because on one hand, I think companies' resistance to keep things this way. There was a stat, and I wish I would have dug it up for this, but there was a stat that I saw this week about the number of companies that went back to full time in the office, and then a huge percentage of them being forced to go back to work from home, or at least some kind of compromised hybrid, because employees kind of revolted. And now there was this other interesting piece this week in Bloomberg about how everybody's kind of open to work. If you spend some time on LinkedIn, everybody seems to have this up, and then you look and it's like, oh, they're still working there. So Bloomberg was talking about Amazon in particular. There was highlighting a piece that people in the HR department there were actively recruiting and working, for Amazon and other companies, but also noting that they're open to work. And so, it begs this question of, again, if you're working from home and you're not in an office and you're not getting, nobody's looking over your shoulder, so to speak, and they're having trouble hiring, is there any employee loyalty left? I mean, are you just gonna, go, subscribe to the gig economy, or just work for the company that today is treating you better than the company you were working for yesterday?
Look, I think for the most part, right, when the decision was made decades ago to kind of wipe out off the balance sheet the value of loyalty towards employees, it's taken a while, but the employees have finally reciprocated. This is a remarkable article because everybody knows that you're on LinkedIn, you're working at Accenture, or you're working at Amazon. Of course, you're open for offers for the most part, right? It's just what's the right offer, but to finally say, okay, you know what, I don't even care anymore. Sure, call me, right? And the fact that the employer knows that this person is entertaining offers, they all knew that, it just wasn't admitted to. And that's one
You are
more.
promoting it.
Yeah,
You might be kind of thing where a recruiter calls you up and
right.
you don't hang up on them, but to be actively promoting it on LinkedIn.
But it's also a signal to the employer. If your employer, your HR people see that you have this banner, like, please call me for new work, and they don't say anything to you, that's a sign that they don't care, right? Go ahead and go. It's fine. You're not on the list of people that we're going to worry about. So put an ad on LinkedIn. And if you leave, you leave, right? We'll move on sort of without you. I think that maybe what we see today, if there's any remnant, is there's loyalty to bosses probably still, right? There just isn't loyalty to companies. I'm sure, and I know that there are still executives who, when they move, people move with them,
Yeah.
right? Especially in sales, for example. But the company, why would they, right? It has to be a two-way street, and we haven't seen from the corporate world any particular loyalty to employees. So why would they expect anything in return? Look, companies are always open for offers too, right? Everybody knows that. So okay, why can't why can't the employee do the same thing?
Yeah.
It's always been there. It's just being acknowledged. It's one more, I think, piece in the kind of Lego of what does work look like, right, in this sort of new millennium, which is
And they're
very
exasperating it, right? I mean, all these layoffs, we've talked about this too, these knee-jerk reaction layoffs all the time, while the CEOs are making, billions of dollars. Why, if you're not, like you say, if you're not being loyal to me as an employee, why should I be loyal to you? If I know that tomorrow you're going to just, lay off jobs for the bottom line, then why wouldn't I, wait around for the next opportunity, right?
exactly
So
right. And all of us, I think at least most of us make the distinction between, hey, there are layoffs because the company has a problem. because the market has really gone south because the company is struggling and trying to survive. Okay, it's very different from, hey, I'm going to knock out 10,000 because I don't want to impact EPS, right? Or some other metric that's going to determine whether I get a bonus or how the street looks at me or whatever, right? So layoffs to keep your dashboard needles pointing in the right direction is very different from, hey, we're forced to make some cuts because it's to save the business, right?
Yeah.
Or because there's been a really significant shift in how we need to work. Most of the time, like you said, especially in tech, it's not that. It's, hey, we hired too many people too fast, or just if we don't do this, the street's not going to be happy. Okay, firing people for Wall Street to make Wall Street happy never goes down well.
And it's only going to get worse, right? I mean, one of the things that I think you pointed out last time we spoke was how much institutional knowledge gets lost with all the hiring and firing and the revolving door. As more of these layoffs are announced, I think more and more people are going to look at this and say, I'm ready. I'm ready. I'm going to have plan B ready. Which is what one of the women in this article that they quoted was saying is, hey, you're exactly right. By the way, she waited for her boss, and then her boss, she noticed her boss had open to work there. She's like, well, if my boss says open to work there, then I'm going to go open to work. And then you add in this IP issue. So the FTC just announced that they're proposing a ban on non-compete clauses. I mean, can you imagine, based on reporting from the Wall Street Journal, can you imagine now if you don't have that hurdle of, hey, I signed an NDA, I signed a confidentiality agreement, I signed a non-compete agreement where I can't work for my competitor for 12 months, 2 years, 3 years. Now, forget about it. I mean, I can be doing mission critical work for you today and go tell your competitor about it tomorrow.
Well, and not compete is one of the things where, depending on what industry we're in, right, it was a real thing or it wasn't a real thing. Because I saw not competes in consulting that got violated all the time, but nobody did anything unless it was a really, like somebody told me, one of the firms I talked to, unless you show up to bid against us on a job, right, we're not going to do anything. But there are under the industries where it is a very serious thing. Again, these things take away from the efficiency in the market, right? If you're having to use a contract to kind of keep somebody, is this person really the one you want to keep? All right. The NDAs are a different story because those things tend to be, for the most part, kind of enforced, right? And that's a different issue if you're sharing confidential information or IP. People get very upset. My experience has been that NDAs, in a lot of cases, are much more heavily enforced than, let's say, non-competes. At least the world that I kind of came from, professional services. But again, it continues this evolution of what does the workplace look like? And what you see is that work is, in a lot of these companies, is just what it always kind of was, right? A place where I go and I sit and get paid and do a job. It's almost like everybody's a contractor right now, Dan. That's what it comes down to. You're a contractor, either de facto or de jure, right? Either it says so on the contract, or it just feels that way when you go to work anyway.
Yeah.
When you're at the mercy of whatever the market is doing now, the last 2 or 3 months, then are you really an employee, right? Or are you just a contractor that doesn't have a contractor badge?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you even said this a few weeks ago about, hey, maybe the work you do becomes your own IP and you license it back to the company. I mean, that, as crazy as that sounded when you said, I even think I said it sounded crazy. If this goes through, that might not be so crazy.
Not at all. I really think that I think I said that in the future, I expect that part of working will be having to sit down with an AI tool once a quarter or once every 6 months and telling it what you've been up to. And there's part of the requirement of working at some of these companies that you will have to license what you know, and they're going to begin to extract it proactively. And if you leave, the AI kicks in for 6 months, right? It's a digital bench, and the digital bench can do what you're doing for a while, right? If that's kind of where it's headed, and at that point, it goes back to this great question we debated so many times, right? Again, which is sort of institutional versus personal job security. And the need to redefine what that is. This is all comes down to that. The old 20th century model was I have job, my job is secure because my institution is secure, right? The 21st century is my job is secure because I'm secure. Doesn't matter what Microsoft does tomorrow or whoever, right? I'll land within a week someplace else, and my value kind of travels with me. That's the macro, I think, kind of transformational issue of you have to be your own value store. Now, people who are creatives, right, have always worked like this. I know people who worked in Hollywood, and they've worked this way for decades. You're only as good as the last movie you made, and so all your experience, everything you know, like directors and producers who I've met, it's contained within them, right? It's just newer to the kind of the professional world. But that's, if you take a step back and look at the big trend, that is a huge, one of the huge macro labor trends of the value store must be you. Can't be anything else. And the Amazon is just one more, you know, element or one more sign of this huge transformation.
The other one I think is that the measure of work, and workplace, needs to shift. It used to be, and I remember being involved in so many conversations about implementing innovation within large enterprises where, you just knew at the end of the day, the hurdle was that somebody over at that client was worried about their fiefdom getting smaller, the amount of reports that they had to them getting smaller. And I think the shift that you're talking about, part of the shift that you're talking about is the shift to expectations of, I think the person that should be rewarded is the person who can get the most done with the least amount of people. Or if you're an employee, the most you can get done in the least amount of hours. I was reading a book yesterday about, no, it was a video I saw about sleep. I think I sent it to you. And the guy kind of said, at some point we us as humans entered this crazy world where we competed by how many hours a day we worked, and the more you worked, the better you were, in this implication that if you didn't work 80-90 hours a week, you were lazy. He said, what about the people that can get the same amount of output done in 20 hours a week?
I think
That's the goal.
Yeah, what I call like the value core, right? So every company, a company is, you might say, is kind of like a nuclear submarine, right? So you say, okay, what why does this thing have any value? For two reasons. One, because it moves underwater, right? And because it fires missiles. Okay, the closer you are to those two functions, the more valuable you are on the ship, right? Because that's why it exists. The farther you are from that, the less value you are. So the same thing happens in company. I think the thing is, every company has this core, right? Or these things that where the value is really created. The closer you are to that core, the safer you are, right? Because your value is sort of protected because you keep the company running. The farther you are from that core, right, the more at risk you are. And I think what happens a lot of times is that people think they're close to the core, and suddenly they realize they're not, right? So when they decide, hey, like HR, oh, HR must be really important to Amazon. We hear about this all the time. No, when they had to let go of thousands of people, the first function on the list was HR. Well, guess what? You just realized you're not part of the core. We had a saying in consulting: the farther you are from clients, the closer you are to being an ex-consultant.
Right.
Right? Right. Because what was the core? The core was sitting in a cubicle at the client site delivering work for client. Everything else was 1 degree away, right? And the more degrees away you took, and that's why anybody who is really good in the job wanted to stay close to that, right? If they offered you some other management role, you would say, well, I'll take it for a 12 month, and I want to be back on doing client work. And so in some places it's design, in some places it's manufacturing, right? In some places it's the creative part of the business. That's, to me, is the real question. Asking yourself, okay, am I next to the core, right? Or do I not even know what the core is? And I think sometimes people have been surprised, at least in my career, and they really were shocked, right? Layoffs. And I've had to lay people off. It was the realization that, hey, you're not anywhere near the core.
Right.
Right. So 5% has to go, you're going to go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great. Great conversation, Carlos, as always. And we'll be back next week, right? I think we've got a guest joining us next week, Carlos.
I know that we're pleased to have next week Greg Stone. Greg's a former television anchor, now author, coach, specializing in really kind of public communication, right? Especially with companies. He coaches a lot of people, a lot of companies on how to handle everything from sort of crisis to messaging. So we'll be talking about storytelling. Greg's an author. Just has a new novel that just came out, and so we'll be talking all things storytelling, communication with Greg Stone next week.
Great. Really looking forward to that. And, a reminder for anybody watching, we don't just sit here and talk to each other, as much fun as it is. We're a peer-to-peer research network. We have over 130,000 working executives, academic leaders, and subject matter experts. So if you are looking for executive coaching, industry briefings, participate in peer-to-peer executive groups, or have any custom research projects that you're looking to get done, get in contact with us. Or get some more information over at DEInetwork.com. In the meantime, we'll be back on Wednesday, live again at noon Eastern. Carlos, have a great week, my friend, and looking forward to seeing you next week.
I'll see you next week. Bye-bye.
Have a great week, everybody. Bye-bye.